So if we look to the sort of horizon scan, start looking to the future, Ellen, what do you feel the future of clinical trial design needs to take into account or consider to continue to evolve? What's the kind of the next evolution of this?
Sure. And I think as we look to the future, I think we can point to some very recent successes in our recent past. There have been some advances made in some neurological conditions that are breathtaking. But I think it's worth noting that that sponsor who did achieve an approval by FDA, we began our engagement and our work in that area through a natural history study first, and they gathered the knowledge. And what they learned in that natural history study, and then a phase 1, and then a phase 2, and then into a successful phase 3 and an approval, was that right from the natural history study, where they were like, let's get our hands around what this population is looking like and what are the endpoints going to be. Let's think intelligently about what are the endpoints, primary and secondary, that you're going after. Secondly, think deeply and deeply look into that SOE so that it is attainable, achievable, and a patient and their carers are going to be encouraged to stick with it all the way through. There were some of those little girls that stuck with that through all the way through the journey.
Fantastic.
It's progressive accretive knowledge. Yeah. And start early and look at that SOE. And again, if you can maintain that family's routine, they're going to be loyal and stick with it because they will not be majorly disrupted in their pursuit of happiness, whatever that looks like. So it's accretive knowledge and applying the lessons of the past. Reach out to consultants and experts, not unlike ourselves. Ask us what we've seen that worked. We'll also share with you what was not so successful or proved to be burdensome. We have a lot of knowledge now, 20 years in our industry. We're eager to use it.
I guess that's as important, isn't it? When we're looking at lessons learned, what didn't work is as important as understanding what did work, so we can avoid the pitfalls in the future. So I think it's clear from what you've said already, Melita, that you definitely think that this is part of the future and that there will be a lasting legacy of this type of model. So let's talk about the importance of patient engagement. So, how do we get the design right? And I think, you started, Ellen, by saying the importance of understanding people's routines and what's important to them. But, how important is it to capture that, and how do we do that? So how can somebody start capturing that information to make sure that every trial design really does have the patient at the center, and that filters through to this application of the mobile nursing? But probably Melita might be one for you to start with.
Well, I think, I think that is really important to capture the whole view. Strictly speaking, for clinical trials, the things that we capture are scientific. Because they have to be reproducible, they have to be statistically analyzed. So much of the kind of softer real world type information that doesn't always make it into a clinical trial design. I think it could do on 2 levels though. One, we collect quite a lot of patient reported outcome measures. So how are the patients and their families feeling about the intervention? What things changed since the last visit? Do they experience less pain? Can they do things now that they couldn't do before? And I think that is probably best assessed in the home environment, as opposed to sitting in a hospital room trying to remember if they tied their shoelaces up properly yesterday. So just doing things in the home environment, I think, will probably help capture more accurately some of those PROM elements. And then also at the point of approvals for drugs to be approved, capturing that additional evidence around the effects of an intervention on a child and on their family that might not be captured through the protocol is really important in persuading regulators that this drug should be approved if indeed it is successful. So it helps with convincing regulators and convincing payers as well that there is a benefit that might be outside of the primary endpoint itself. Yeah.
Was there something you wanted to add to that, Ellen?
simply to say that, again, it's an investment
Yeah.
that others are making in a future and a practical future. And we agree, definitely, Dr. Irving, with your assessment that it needs to make sense to the payer. And the ability to climb off and on the school bus is huge. And maybe that's more effective measure than a 6-minute walk test, where everyone in that hallway is under so much stress. You can almost taste it, you can smell it. But that young one being able to walk down the front stairs, down the driveway, and climb on a school bus is everything we want to see.
Yeah.
There needs to be some give and take for what regulators are looking for. And again, I refer back to endpoints.
Mhm.
I think we're maybe beginning to see a shifting now in what is an endpoint, and let's really deeply look at what are we hoping that the outcome is going to be, and what does success look like. So
Do you
we
think that this
welcome and
model
encourage
helps
it.
to do that shift? Because I think, we're all starting to understand that, the endpoints do mean different things for different people. And do you think that this model will help drive that shift to looking at some of these more softer endpoints and moving away from regimented clinical endpoints?
I do, because here in the United States, certainly CMS, which is the official government, this is how we're going to get things paid for under Medicare, Medicaid, Department of Defense, big spenders in healthcare. I think they are opening their minds to what the outcome is of a successful run at this.
Mhm.
And we saw that in the CMS utterances on April 7th of 2022 about a certain drug in the Alzheimer's space.
Yeah.
That, they were questioning, show me efficacy and effectiveness from your earliest trial. Don't wait for your phase 3 to bring that to me. Bring it to me as early in the process as possible.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see that translate into rare and ultra rare disease as well. That again, maybe the 6-minute walk test isn't the be all end all of accomplishment, or as an exclusion inclusion benchmark. Maybe it's going to be climbing on the school bus, or climbing up a slide on the playground. We might have to see a softening in what the payer is looking for, because as much as we don't like it to be true, their voice is an important one.
Yeah. And I think that alone is an important legacy of this change, isn't it? Aside from all of the other benefits of this type of model, from a patient perspective, to be able to have some of those different endpoints to be validated and to be considered as important, because really from a patient perspective, those are the things that matter. Can I iron? Can I do this? Can I get on the school bus? Those are actually the things that matter. So to be able to have a shift towards that, that is game changing for patients, and then the potential of what that means in the approvals process. So it's that alone is a wonderful legacy. I just want to come back to you, Stephanie, just to kind of round up on this. So in terms of getting feedback from participants on the experience of taking part in the trials and the experience of the remote nursing, how do you capture that, and how does that feed back into this process of evolving and developing for the future?
So it's an excellent question, and something we're constantly working through because we are primarily working with the sites and our nurses. PCM Trials is not producing anything that in the United States would be IRB reviewed or approved, or EC reviewed or approved, because we don't want to add to that timeline. So we primarily rely on the sites to interact with their participants about what that feedback is, as well as the participant with the nurse, so that we can drive continuous improvement and ensure that we are designing our services to best fit those participants. It's something that we're trying to see how we can get all of that information from the participant while keeping those data privacy and considerations related to reviewing what needs to go through review processes.
Wonderful, thank you. We've actually had a question just come in off the back of what you were saying there, Ellen, saying great to see that the 6-minute walk test is not always applicable, or even maybe an out-of-date process now. So I think everyone's aligned on that.
We're hoping that we will see the day. It's the number one reason we might have to disqualify ourselves from serving a trial in a more complete way. And certainly, it's just such a stressful thing for the littles and their parents.
Yeah.
There's so much on the line. And, you know, if you or I were asked to perform a rote specific task at a specific time in an unfamiliar place with unfamiliar people, clearly everyone just a little bit anxious, you know, would any of us perform at our best? So we do see that littles, I think some of our best outcomes come when there are Legos on the floor and nurses on the floor and little ones on the floor. I think everyone's in their happy place.
Yeah. And I think that's a really lovely image to end on, isn't it? You know, that really is a massive mind shift from what people think of as a clinical trial and participation in research to then actually think of it in that context. That's a really lovely way to end on that, Ellen. We have got some questions that have been submitted by our audience in advance. I'm just going to go straight to these, but just to say to anyone else that's listening, if you have got more questions, please do pop them into the chat. So the first question we've had here, which might be possibly for Ellen or Stephanie to answer, is how do I begin considering a mobile research nurse in my trial design? So what's that first step?
What's the first step is to reach out what we need in order to discern. And I rely heavily on Stephanie and her team of experts at adapting protocols from the site to the kitchen table. We like to take in a protocol, get a look at that SOE, show me some a nice big N of safety data if we're going to be administering IMP in the home, always helpful for us. A lab manual, so we know exactly what it is as far as the needs for processing, and the level of interest and commitment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we do take our time. We say no about 1/3 of the time.
Interesting.
If
So it's not a suitable for everybody in all cases.
Yeah. Or undignified to perform in the home. And you know, that's a piece of this too, is human dignity. We are in the intimate space of a home.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I probably review 30 protocols a week. And some of them I'm seeing more and more of them are written intelligently and with DCT, decentralized trials in mind, where before it was 1 in 20. Now it's most of them acknowledge that people have lives.
So the next question we've got here is, how can I find out if a mobile research nurse is vital for my specific trial? So I guess that's, how do you work out if it is the right approach? And maybe this is down to at what point somebody would engage with somebody like yourself as well. How does somebody, is it right at the start of thinking about the project, or what's the timing, and how do you really make sure if it is the right process for your trial?
I think Stephanie would agree with me. It's never too early. Even if a trial is a twinkle in your eye and you're planning that natural history study, it's worth having a chat. We take a look at a lot of protocol synopses, which is not a formally signed off on formalized final protocol. But of course, by the time we get midway through a trial, I'm sure Dr. Irving will agree, we're looking at protocol amendment 5, 6, 7. You know, it's research, it's science, it's constantly evolving. So it's never too early to engage, and we can lay out what is typically done, or these are the standard activities. And if you have a special need or request, then I call on Stephanie. So I guess, Stephanie, what's an example of something that we say, thank you, but no thank you, or we don't think it's fit for purpose in our recent past?
Sure. So one example that comes to mind is for infants, infants in respiratory distress during an unscheduled illness event, where we would need to be auscultating the abdomen to ensure the appropriate breath sounds. That's something that we don't feel is consistent across mobile research clinicians, and we would want them to go back to a clinician who had seen that participant in their healthy state to know the healthy baseline versus what we're looking at for an illness endpoint. That's something where we've said, you know, we would love to support this as much as we can, but we don't feel confident in the quality of the data that we would be providing if we just had a clinician looking at that data point. We are happy to tell you when we feel we are out of our depth and that we think it is not something that is practical to be done in the home. But I cannot echo Ellen's point enough that if you are even considering DCT, to have a conversation about how we can adapt it. It is not only a great way to structure a protocol at the outset, but it also saves everyone a lot of time and money, because if you have to go through an additional review cycle or amendments down the line to add in things that could have been added in at the outset, it's only going to prolong your timelines and prolong care for those participants.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we've come to the end of all of the questions, but I would say that if anyone's got a question that they think of after this session, we are going to have some contact details up at the end on a slide. So please do reach out and get in touch if you want to have any follow-up questions. So I would just like to say a huge thanks. I think we can all agree that's been a really informative session. I've certainly learned a lot there. And I think the imagery that has been conjured up by the way you've all described that is really shifted my mind, certainly about what we expect and traditionally think of as clinical trials. So I think it's a really exciting thing to see has got such traction. I'm really excited to see where it goes in the future. So I really appreciate you all giving your insights, and thank you so much. Thank you also to our audience for tuning in and listening and bringing us your really insightful questions. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. Please do feel free, as I said, to reach out if you've got any questions using the contacts on the screen, or you can come to Becky or any of our team and we can field those forward. Lastly, just to say that the full session will be available on demand later in the month, so that you can revisit, recatch up, or dial into any of the particular elements that you'd like to revisit. So thank you all very much, and I appreciate your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Thanks. Bye.